Okay, so we are in a studio in Kathmandu, and I am about to ask Ann Hunkins about her experience translating stories by Nepali women and Nepali men, and her long journey in Nepal through from the 80s to now. So, Anne, can you tell me a little bit about how you came to Nepali literature?
Well, okay. The first time I came here was '86 as a student, studying right at SIT. But even then, I was writing my own poetry and everything. So I just was like, well, what kind of poetry is there here, or what kind of short stories? So I just started reading it. But also then I went back to the U.S. to study Nepali, and a lot of the way that we're studying it was to read these stories, like by Puskar Shamsar, like Paribanda, and Guru Prasad Mainali's Naso, all these classics, like really old stories. That was to learn Nepali. So that's how I got interested in them. But all those stories, all those anthologies were all men, except they would all have like one story by Parijat, and that's it. She was the only woman.
Right.
That's all.
Yeah.
I was like, aren't there any women writing in Nepal? So I wrote this proposal for a Fulbright scholarship to go and see if there's any women writers there, basically, and to translate them. So that's how that started.
And did you find any women writers?
Well, yeah, there were plenty. They just weren't in those anthologies that were in the Columbia University Library. But they weren't in the big anthologies anyway. They weren't like the anthologies that the Royal Nepal Academy and people were putting out. The women were like, there'd be like 3 women, 2 women, or just Parijat.
Right.
That's it. So, yeah, I started reading all these women's stories, and then I was thinking, well, I could do a whole women's anthology, but then I thought, but the point isn't to just exclude the men either. The interesting thing is, what about if we did it equally and we looked at both, instead of just always looking at the men? We are also looking at the women, but maybe it would be interesting to see what the men were saying about the women.
Oh, right.
So then I was looking at the stories that the men had written, which had women as main characters.
Okay.
And what kind of stories those were,
So can you describe some of the stories that you translated?
Yeah, so I don't know, should I start with the men or the women? Some of the men's stories about the women were not like I expected. Some of them were really great, very like amazing portraits of women that I thought, how did they write this, Like we talked about that, Govinda Bahadur Gothali wrote that one about Kegari Kishoba, right?
Oh, right.
The one where the woman she had an illicit affair with this guy that was unacceptable to her family, so they cast her out, and then he died, so she was left completely helpless, and she was living in this brothel, which was run by this brothel keeper who was this very interesting character, who was always running around like I was saying, like, can we get the colonel's son? He's I can't remember. Did they have phones then? I can't quite remember, but I think somebody sent someone to the house saying, the colonel's son needs some companionship tonight. And she was like, God, that could make us. We could only get him, but all these other women are engaged elsewhere. We need her. And Soba is sitting there waiting to find out if her mother's died, who's already cast her out, so she's not gonna talk to her. The family's never spoken to her since then, but she's still hoping that she could see her mother's face, before she dies. So they sent a woman out to look for another woman who also could have been going to the colonel's son, She's going out on the errand to look for Soba's mother and find out what happened to her. So then the whole story is just her sitting at the window and looking and being like, where's Kanchi? Kanchi Aigo China. And people come in and out of the room and do different things, like another woman there comes in and she's like, what do you think of my sari? How about this gold chain? Isn't it great? And Soba's just like, yeah, where's Kanchi? And the woman's like, God, that's all you can think about. And then she's like, then the woman is complaining how, you're all high caste and you think you're so great because you're higher caste than us. You didn't have to do this, or blah, 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 all this stuff. And Soba's just like, yeah, whatever. just looking out the window. And all this stuff's going on, and then the brothel keeper's husband comes in, and like, he's like, you know, I've always wanted to tell you that I really like you.
Okay.
And she's just like, oh, God. You know. And
Wrong timing.
Yeah. And then the brothel keeper comes in and says, what are you doing here with her? Get out of here. And he's just like, skulks out, you know. Like, he's kind of this pathetic character. And then she's like, we have to be careful. Somebody said that the police were talking about us. We need to, like, be alert. Some stranger comes in, don't just start talking to them, you know. So if we could get the colonel's son, then the police would, you know, this could all be worked out.
Okay, that was the reason why they needed the colonel's son. Okay.
Right, exactly. So there's all this politics just going on, and then there's also, she's having these flashbacks of memory of when she was with the guy who died, you know, and how amazing he was. And then she's even having another flashback of her mother, who was in the 1934 earthquake, and who was saying, oh, after the earthquake, everything was just dust. We were all buried, and I couldn't find you. I couldn't see anybody. And she's having this sort of fantasy of what that was like, this image, while she's waiting to see if her mother's dead or not. It's all this stuff happening. So that's one of my favorite stories in there.
It seems that he knew a lot about the brothels.
Yeah, it does. I don't know how. He didn't say. But maybe a friend of his, you know.
Right, exactly. Of course, always.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And what about, then you were explaining to me about these differences in the stories written by Brahmin writers and Newar writers, because finally you managed to find a few written by writers who are not Brahmins.
Right. Yeah, that was another thing that I was trying to find. Not just not men, but not Brahmin men, or not Brahmins at all. Yeah. So yeah, big difference. Like when you read Amma by Vijay Malla, that was also about a woman who went off with a guy that was unacceptable to the family, but in that case, it's not that he died. He basically, you know, had his way with her, took her jewelry, and took off and left her in a room somewhere. Fortunately, like the people in the room the people who owned the room understood her situation, and so they helped her get back to her family, you know, which could have not been the case. They could have just sold her to a brothel, you know. She was like a young woman. She didn't know anything. Right. She didn't know where she was, even. This
is in the 1950s, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Right. But then, in that story, she gets back, but she gets back to her... that also tells, like I was saying, that I forgot, but that also tells really this nice portrait of the whole, like, Newar community and the different, like, castes and jobs and all that stuff, the music, all sorts of different things. It's a really nice, it's a beautiful portrait of that, actually, like daily life in this community. But then she comes back and goes into the house, and, you know, of course her mother, and she said something, she was going to say some excuse like, oh, I went to see my aunt in Bhaktapur, that's where I was, you know. And of course they had already sent somebody to her aunt's house in Bhaktapur to see if she was there, you know, just in case they were looking for her. And she goes up and says, oh. And her mother looks up at her. Her mother's just like making the food over there. And she looks at her when she walks in, like, and for just a second she's like, my daughter. And but then she kind of closes down and goes back to the cooking, doesn't say anything. But, you know, like you're saying, a Brahmin family would have kicked her out in that 1 second, right?
Definitely.
She'd have been gone.
Yeah. Mm.
She could never have come back. But she looks back to the cooking, and then the girl starts saying, what? I was at my aunt's house in Bhaktapur. I was at my aunt's house in Bhaktapur. What is your problem? What? Can't I even go to her house? And the mother just doesn't say anything. She knows that's a lie, but what's she going to say? So she just puts the food onto the plate, and she goes, here, no, eat, come and eat.
Wow, that's pretty powerful.
I know, it's really like... Oof.
And also the background of the story is that the mom was incredibly proud of the daughter because she was being educated.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. She was saying, I'm not upset I didn't have a son. I had a daughter, and it's just as good. Which is kind of how she was putting it, you know. Daughter, even better than having a son, because she's going to train for this and that, and she's going to be amazing. And then she ends up, you know, just going off with this guy and losing her entire reputation. So it's yeah.
But it's not, the end of the world
Right.
for her.
It's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
That's the difference. Yeah.
Mhm.
Right. And then also there was another one by Padmavati Singh. Did I tell you about that one?
No, you didn't.
That was interesting because that was about like her first menstruation, girl's first menstruation,
Okay, yeah.
where she had to spend, go into the dark room for like 14 days.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
But it was also very like, I don't know, it wasn't like, yes, they put her in the room for the 14 days, but they weren't like rigid about it. They were just, her friends came and visited it, and then she came out, and she was just, it's the thing about it, the story itself is not sad. Like, there's nothing sad in it.
Okay.
It's just a story of, she goes to the room, she has this fantasy about a guy across in the window of the house next door that she keeps seeing his face, and he's also looking at her. And so she's like fantasizing about him, and all this stuff. And then at the very end of the story, it's about the peach. They have a peach tree, and the peaches have been blooming, or the peaches have been ripening the whole time she's in the room for the 14 days. When she comes out, they're ripe. But you're supposed to offer the first one to the gods, right?
Oh, right.
And so one day everybody goes off to like some bhajans or something, and she's alone in the house, and she's sitting under the peach tree, and the first one falls like right in her lap, and suddenly she turns around and they're coming back from the bhajans, and she's like, I know we're supposed to offer it to the gods first. She's like, but I want to keep it, and she like puts it under her shawl, and that's the story.
Okay.
So it's, you know what I mean? It's not like these stories are that one is not tragic, which so many of them are. That's
Right.
what I liked about that one. It's just kind of an ordinary, a normal life story, without like.
In which the girl decides that she's more important than the gods.
Right.
Wow, that's pretty radical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Let me just shut this for 2 seconds.